I pulled into my driveway, the gravel crunching wearily beneath the tires. 2 weeks. It felt like 2 years. The red-eye flight from Vancouver had left me hollowed out, a mere shell of a man. My mother, bless her heart, had suffered a stroke, a cruel thief that had snatched away her words, her memories. I'd sat vigil at her bedside, a silent sentinel against the encroaching darkness, willing her back to us. Now, thank God, she was stable, pulling through, but the cost had been steep. I was desperate, achingly so, to get home to Evelyn Brooks, my wife, my anchor in this storm-tossed world. She was only 63, a vibrant woman trapped in the cruel vice of early-onset Alzheimer's. Every day was a battle against the encroaching fog that threatened to steal her away, piece by piece. 2 weeks apart felt like an eternity, a yawning chasm in the fragile fabric of our life together. The house was dark, swallowed by the inky blackness of the evening. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. It was barely 8 p.m., and Evelyn usually kept the living room lights blazing, a warm beacon against the gathering gloom. I wrestled my suitcase from the trunk, its weight amplified by fatigue and dread. As I fumbled for my keys at the front door, my fingers clumsy and unresponsive, I heard it, a faint thumping sound, a rhythmic pulse of desperation that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the house. My heart lurched, a trapped bird fluttering wildly against my ribs. I shoved the key into the lock, the tumblers clicking with agonizing slowness, and burst through the door, my voice a strangled whisper. The sound was clearer now, amplified in the suffocating silence of the house. Someone was banging on something, hard, urgently, and there was a muffled voice, hoarse and weak, barely audible. It was coming from below, from the unfinished, cold confines of the basement. I dropped my suitcase, the thud echoing ominously in the sudden stillness, and ran to the basement door. My blood ran cold. It was locked from the outside, secured with a heavy-duty padlock, a brutal instrument of confinement that I'd never seen before. The thumping grew louder, more frantic, a desperate plea echoing in the darkness. "Evelyn," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I desperately searched for something, anything, to break the lock. A faint cry came from the other side, a whimper of recognition, weak, desperate. "Evelyn, my wife." I ran to the garage, the concrete floor cold beneath my feet. I grabbed a crowbar from the cluttered workbench, the steel cold and reassuring in my trembling hands. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I attacked the padlock, prying it off in 3 violent yanks, the metal groaning in protest. The door swung open with a jarring creak, and the smell hit me first, a wave of nauseating stench that made me gag. Urine, stale sweat, and something sour, something rotten. I flicked on the light switch, and the bare bulb flickered to life, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare on the scene below. I nearly collapsed. Evelyn was at the bottom of the stairs, huddled in a pathetic heap, filthy and trembling. Her nightgown was stained and torn, clinging to her emaciated frame like a shroud. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken, her lips cracked and bleeding. She looked up at me with eyes that didn't quite recognize me at first, confusion and terror warring in her expression. "Nathan, Cole." Her voice was a dry rasp, barely a whisper. Is that really you?" I was down those stairs in seconds, taking them 2 at a time, scooping her into my arms. She weighed almost nothing, all bone and fragile skin. How long had she been down here, abandoned, without food, without water, without light? "I'm here, sweetheart," I crooned, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm here. I've got you." I carried her upstairs, cradling her like a child, my mind a whirlwind of horror and disbelief. Who did this? How did this happen? I laid her gently on the couch, her frail body trembling against the worn fabric. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling with the buttons, and dialed 911, relaying our address to the dispatcher, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. As I waited for the paramedics to arrive, I looked around the house, really looked. Everything seemed subtly, disturbingly different. Furniture had been moved, rearranged in a way that was both unfamiliar and unsettling. There were cardboard boxes stacked in the corner of the living room, boxes I'd never seen before, their contents a mystery. Evelyn's pill organizer, usually a fixture on the kitchen counter, was gone, vanished without a trace. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their presence a whirlwind of controlled chaos. They checked Evelyn's vitals, their faces grim, severely dehydrated, malnourished, showing early signs of hypothermia. Despite it being September, I stood there in a daze, numb with shock, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of reality. "Sir, when did you last see your wife?" one of the paramedics asked, his voice gentle but firm. "2 weeks ago," I choked out. "I left her with our daughter. Lydia Harper was supposed to stay with her while I was in Vancouver. My mother had a stroke, and my voice broke, the words dissolving into a sob. Lydia Harper did this." The paramedic exchanged a quick, significant glance with her partner, but said nothing. They carefully loaded Evelyn onto a stretcher, securing her with straps. I rode with her in the ambulance, holding her hand, her fingers cold and fragile in mine, whispering reassurances that she was safe now, that I was here, that I was so sorry, so desperately sorry, that I'd left her. At St. Michael's Hospital, they admitted her immediately, whisking her away for tests and treatment. A nurse pulled me aside while the doctors worked to stabilize Evelyn. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice low and serious, "I need to ask, has your wife been locked in that basement for the entire 2 weeks you were away?" The question hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath, leaving me reeling. 14 days. My Evelyn, my gentle, loving Evelyn, trapped in that cold, dark basement for 14 days. I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I just found her like that." A police officer arrived an hour later. Detective Caleb Grant, Toronto Police Services, Elder Abuse Unit. Yes, there was actually a specialized unit for this kind of monstrous crime. I sat in the sterile, impersonal waiting room and told him everything, pouring out the details of our life, our struggles, our trust, and our betrayal. "I'm Nathan Cole Holloway. I'm 65, retired from a career in civil engineering. My wife, Evelyn Brooks, is 63. She was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 years ago. It's been progressing slowly, but she can still do most things with reminders and routine. She knows who I am. She knows our daughter. She just gets confused sometimes, forgets where she put things, loses track of time. Our daughter, Lydia Harper, is 38. She's a CPA at a mid-sized firm in downtown Toronto. She married Brandon Wells 3 years ago. Brandon Wells calls himself a business consultant, but I've never been entirely clear on what he actually does. He's always talking about cryptocurrency, NFTs, passive income streams. I never liked him, if I'm being honest. But Lydia seemed happy, and that's what mattered. 2 weeks ago, my mother in Vancouver had a stroke. My sister called me in a panic at 3:00 the morning. I booked the first flight out. Lydia volunteered immediately to stay with Evelyn while I was gone. "Dad, don't worry about a thing," she'd said. "I'll take care of Mom. You just focus on Grandma." I was grateful, relieved even. Lydia knew her mother's routines, knew where all the medications were, knew how to handle the confusion and the sundowning that came with the disease. I called every day from Vancouver. "For the first week," Lydia answered, "Mom's fine, Dad. We're watching her favorite shows. I'm making sure she eats. Don't worry." But during the second week, the calls went to voicemail. She texted instead, "Sorry, busy with Mom. She's good. Call you later." But she never called back. I tried calling Evelyn directly, but her phone went straight to voicemail too. I told myself it was fine. Lydia had it under control. My mother needed me. I stayed in Vancouver. Detective Caleb Grant listened to all of this, his expression unreadable, taking copious notes. Then, he asked the question that made my blood run cold. "Mr. Holloway, during those 2 weeks, did you give your daughter power of attorney over your wife's affairs?" "No, absolutely not." "Did your wife sign any documents that you're aware of?" "Not that I know of." "Why?" He closed his notebook, the snap echoing in the tense silence. "We'll need to investigate further, but Mr. Holloway, this appears to be more than just neglect. We'll be in touch." Evelyn stayed in the hospital for 3 days. They rehydrated her, treated her for malnutrition and exposure, and ran a battery of tests, probing for any unseen damage. She kept asking where Lydia was. "Where's Jenny?" she'd repeat, her brow furrowed in confusion. "She was just here. She was making me lunch." "No, sweetheart, she wasn't." On the second day, while Evelyn was sleeping, her breathing shallow and uneven, I went home to look around more carefully. I needed to understand what had happened, to unravel the tangled web of lies and betrayal. What I found made me physically ill, twisting my gut with revulsion. The basement door had been padlocked from the outside. There was a grimy, stained bucket in the corner, the unmistakable stench of urine clinging to it. That's what Evelyn had used as a toilet. A thin, threadbare blanket lay crumpled on the cold concrete floor, offering little comfort against the damp chill. No food, no water. The light bulb had been removed from the socket, leaving the space in perpetual darkness. My wife, who sometimes forgot what day it was, but who could still laugh at silly jokes and loved watching the Blue Jays play, had been locked in darkness for 2 weeks. Upstairs, I found more disturbing evidence. Lydia's laptop was still on the kitchen table, the password conveniently saved, as if she had nothing to hide, or perhaps as if she simply didn't care. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I couldn't stop myself. I looked through her files, driven by a desperate need to understand. What I found was methodical, calculated, evil. There were scanned documents, power of attorney papers with Evelyn's signature, real estate documents, bank statements, and a file labeled, with chilling simplicity, investment opportunity, Brandon Wells's fund. I sat there for an hour, paralyzed, reading through everything, my hands shaking so hard I could barely click the mouse. Here's what they'd done. The depths of their depravity laid bare in the cold, unfeeling language of legal documents. The first week I was gone, Lydia had taken Evelyn to a lawyer's office, some sketchy notary in Scarborough, not our trusted family lawyer, not someone who knew us, who cared about us. She'd had Evelyn sign the POA documents, using her Alzheimer's-induced confusion to convince her it was just paperwork for Dad, routine matters that required her signature. The notary, apparently, didn't ask many questions, content to rubber stamp the documents and collect his fee. Evelyn's signature was shaky but recognizable, a pathetic testament to her dwindling cognitive abilities. With that POA, Lydia had accessed our bank accounts, systematically draining them. She'd withdrawn $75,000 from our savings, money we'd carefully set aside for Evelyn's future care. As her Alzheimer's progressed, money meant to ensure her comfort and dignity in her final years. She'd also taken out a home equity line of credit against our house for another $100,000. We'd owned our home in Leslieville outright for 20 years, a symbol of our hard work and security. Now, thanks to our own daughter, we owed the bank $100,000. All that money, $175,000, had been transferred to something called Thornhill Capital Management. 3 clicks later, I discovered that Thornhill Capital was Brandon Wells's company, a numbered corporation registered just 6 months ago. Its business, according to the online records, cryptocurrency investment and blockchain consulting. In other words, Brandon Wells was running some kind of crypto scheme, a modern-day Ponzi scheme dressed up in the jargon of the digital age, and they'd used my wife's confusion and my absence to fund it. But here's the part that made me want to vomit, the cold-blooded calculation that revealed the true depths of their heartlessness. They couldn't let Evelyn talk to me. If I'd called the house, Evelyn, even in her confused state, would have told me something was wrong. Even with her Alzheimer's, she'd know something wasn't right, and she'd find a way to communicate her distress. So, they needed to keep her quiet, to silence her completely. Their solution? Lock her in the basement, like some unwanted animal. I found a text exchange between Lydia and Brandon from day 3, chilling evidence of their conspiracy. "Brandon, she keeps crying for her dad. This isn't going to work. Lydia, she'll forget. Give it another day. The confusion helps. Brandon, what if someone checks on her? Lydia, who? Dad's in Vancouver. Mom's friends haven't visited in months because of her condition. We're fine." They'd planned this. They'd knowingly, deliberately locked a confused, vulnerable woman in a basement to steal her life savings, to line their own pockets with her suffering. I called Detective Caleb Grant immediately, my hands trembling so violently I could barely dial the number. He came to the house within the hour, accompanied by 2 other officers, their faces grim and professional. I showed them everything: the laptop, the documents, the text messages, the state of the basement, the chilling evidence of their cruelty. "Mr. Holloway," Caleb Grant said carefully, his voice devoid of emotion, "this is elder abuse, financial exploitation, and unlawful confinement. We'll need your wife's testimony when she's able, but there's more than enough here for charges." "Where's my daughter now?" I asked, my voice a raw whisper. "We don't know yet. Do you have an address for her?" I did. Lydia and Brandon lived in a modern condo in Liberty Village, about 20 minutes away, a sterile, soulless space that now seemed to embody their moral emptiness. Detective Caleb Grant made a call, and within an hour, officers were dispatched to their address. They weren't there, but what the officers found in that condo would lead to even more charges, further solidifying the case against them. The place was nearly empty, stripped bare like a stage after the final performance. Furniture was gone, closets cleaned out, as if they'd vanished into thin air. But in the trash, carelessly discarded amidst the debris of their hasty departure, the officers found their undoing: bank statements, paperwork for one-way tickets to Portugal, and a printed email from a property management company in Lisbon about a 6-month rental. They were planning to run, to take the money and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty for financial crimes, a safe haven for their ill-gotten gains. But they'd left too much evidence behind, and they'd underestimated how quickly I'd return. My mother's recovery had been faster than expected, a small miracle amidst the surrounding darkness, and I'd come home 3 days earlier than originally planned. If I'd stayed in Vancouver for the full 2 weeks, as planned, Evelyn might have died in that basement, alone and forgotten. Lydia and Brandon would have discovered her body, played the devastated daughter and son-in-law, and been on a plane to Lisbon before anyone asked too many questions. Detective Caleb Grant was blunt about it, his words a stark and chilling assessment of the situation. "Your early return saved your wife's life, Mr. Holloway." That realization, that my daughter, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike, who'd cried in my arms when her goldfish died when she was 7, had been willing to let her own mother die for money, shattered something inside me, leaving a gaping hole where love and trust had once resided. I couldn't process it, couldn't reconcile the image of the sweet, innocent child with the cold, calculating woman who had committed such a monstrous act. The manhunt began, intensifying with each passing hour. Toronto police issued warrants for Lydia Harper and Brandon Wells, their faces plastered across the news within 48 hours. Daughter and son-in-law wanted in elder abuse case. The headlines screamed. The media had a field day, devouring the story with a ravenous appetite. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, neighbors, people from my old workplace reaching out, their voices a cacophony of concern and morbid curiosity. I ignored all of it, shutting out the noise and focusing all my energy on Evelyn. She was released from the hospital on day 4, still weak and fragile, but recovering physically. Mentally, though, she was lost, adrift in a sea of confusion. She kept asking where Lydia was, her voice tinged with a childlike longing. "Is Jenny coming for dinner?" she'd ask, her eyes searching mine with a desperate hope. "No, sweetheart, not tonight. Did I do something wrong? Why won't she visit?" How do you explain to someone with Alzheimer's that their daughter is a monster, that the woman she gave birth to, raised, and loved had locked her in a basement to steal from her? How do you shatter that fragile reality without breaking her heart all over again? I couldn't, so I just held her hand, her skin papery and thin, and said, "Jenny's busy right now, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." On day 6, Lydia and Brandon were arrested at Pearson Airport, their dreams of escape shattered on the tarmac. They'd tried to board a flight to London, England, their first stop on the long road to Portugal, but border services flagged them immediately. Their names flagged in the system. Detective Caleb Grant called me within the hour, his voice devoid of triumph. "We've got them. They're in custody." I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness that seemed to consume me from the inside out. The arrest didn't bring Evelyn back, didn't erase the trauma, didn't restore the stolen money. It was just another grim milestone in this agonizing ordeal. The charges came down like a hammer, each word a blow to the gut. 2 counts of elder abuse, 2 counts of financial exploitation of a vulnerable person, 2 counts of unlawful confinement, 2 counts of fraud over $5,000, and 1 count of forgery related to the POA documents. Brandon Wells faced additional charges related to his so-called investment fund, which turned out to be, no surprise, a Ponzi scheme. He'd taken money from at least 30 other investors, all elderly or vulnerable people, promising unrealistic 40% returns on cryptocurrency trades that never actually happened. He was just shuffling money around, paying old investors with new investor money, a classic con. The Crown attorney assigned to the case, a sharp, determined woman named Melissa Jang, met with me a week after their arrest, her eyes filled with a steely resolve. She laid out the case in detail, her voice precise and unwavering. "Mr. Holloway, this is one of the most egregious elder abuse cases I've seen in my career. The premeditation, the exploitation of your wife's cognitive condition, the financial devastation they caused. This is serious. We're pushing for maximum sentences." "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Elder abuse with unlawful confinement, combined with the financial exploitation, we're looking at 8 to 12 years for Lydia Harper, 10 to 15 for Brandon Wells because of the additional fraud charges. And the money." Patricia's expression softened, a flicker of empathy in her eyes. "That's going to be harder. Brandon Wells's fund is bankrupt. The money is gone, spent, moved offshore, or paid to early investors to keep the scheme running. We'll pursue restitution orders, but I want you to be realistic about recovery." In other words, the $175,000 was gone, vanished into the digital ether of Brandon Wells's crypto scam. Our savings, our home equity, the security we'd worked so hard to build, all wiped away in an instant. I asked the question that had been haunting me, the question that threatened to unravel what little sanity I had left. Did she know? Lydia. Did she know what Brandon Wells was doing was fraud? Patricia opened the evidence file, her expression grim. "Based on the emails and texts we've recovered, yes, she knew. She helped him recruit investors, including 2 of her co-workers from her accounting firm. She created fake financial statements for the fund. She was an active participant. My daughter wasn't a victim of her husband's scheme. She was a co-conspirator, a willing accomplice in his depravity." The bail hearing was painful, a grotesque charade that offered no solace. Lydia's lawyer argued for her release, pending trial, citing her lack of a criminal record, her ties to the community, and her supposed low-flight risk, despite the clear evidence of their planned escape to Portugal. The Crown argued the opposite, emphasizing the clear flight risk, the destruction of evidence, and the ongoing danger to Evelyn. The judge sided with the Crown. Bail denied. Lydia and Brandon would remain in custody at the Toronto South Detention Center until trial. I attended that hearing, sitting in the back row, a silent observer in this tragic drama. I watched my daughter in an orange jumpsuit, her face pale and drawn, plead with the judge for her release. She cried, tears streaming down her face. She apologized, her voice trembling with what seemed like genuine remorse. She said she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd been manipulated by Brandon, that she never meant to hurt anyone. When she saw me, her eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, and she tried to mouth something, her lips forming a desperate plea. "Dad, please." I stood up and walked out, unable to bear the sight of her, unable to forgive her betrayal. The criminal case moved forward, a slow, agonizing process that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. But I wasn't content to wait for justice from the courts alone. I hired a lawyer, Adrian Blake, a partner at a firm that specialized in elder law and estate litigation. His advice was clear, pragmatic, and unwavering. "Nathan, you have grounds for a civil suit. Sue them for everything they've taken, plus damages for what they put Evelyn through. Even if they don't have assets now, they might in the future. Inheritance, earnings, property, lock it down." I filed suit 2 weeks later, my rage and grief channeled into the cold, unfeeling language of legal documents. Lydia Harper Holloway and Brandon Wells, defendants, claims financial exploitation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, conversion, breach of fiduciary duty, damages sought, $175,000 in stolen funds, plus $200,000 in additional damages for Evelyn's suffering. But there was more to do, more avenues to pursue. I contacted the College of CPAs of Ontario, the regulatory body for certified professional accountants. Lydia had used her credentials as an accountant to lend legitimacy to Brandon Wells's scheme, to lure in unsuspecting investors. Her co-workers from the accounting firm had trusted her professional judgment, believing in her integrity. She'd violated every ethical standard of her profession. I filed a formal complaint, outlining her egregious misconduct in detail. Within a month, Lydia's CPA license was suspended, pending the outcome of the criminal trial. If convicted, she'd be permanently disbarred, stripped of her professional status. She'd never work as an accountant again. That should have felt satisfying. A measure of justice served. It didn't. It just felt necessary. A small step in the long and arduous journey towards healing. The months that followed were a blur. A chaotic jumble of legal proceedings, medical appointments, and sleepless nights. Evelyn's Alzheimer's worsened, the stress of the trauma accelerating her cognitive decline, her neurologist explained gently. She stopped asking about Lydia, which was somehow worse than the questions. A silent acknowledgement of the unspeakable betrayal. It was like her brain had erased her daughter as a protection mechanism, shielding her from the pain she could no longer comprehend. I hired a full-time caregiver to help with Evelyn while I dealt with the legal proceedings. A kind, compassionate woman named Maria who quickly became a part of our lives. The bills were piling up: medical expenses, legal fees, the mortgage payments on the helilock we never wanted. We were drowning financially. And the people responsible were sitting in jail, awaiting trial, seemingly immune to the devastation they'd caused. The preliminary hearing happened in January, 5 months after Evelyn's rescue, 5 months of relentless anxiety and grief. I testified, reliving the nightmare in excruciating detail. I walked the court through finding Evelyn, through discovering the documents, through realizing what they'd done, the scope of their treachery. Lydia's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim, too, manipulated by Brandon Wells, desperate for money, suffering from her own mental health issues. It was garbage, a pathetic attempt to deflect blame, and the judge saw through it immediately. "Miss Holloway," the judge said, her voice sharp and unforgiving, "you are a trained accountant. You understood exactly what you were doing. You exploited your mother's cognitive vulnerability for financial gain. There is no mitigating factor that excuses that." The case was bound over for trial. The trial date set for June, 8 months after the nightmare began. But before the trial, something unexpected happened. A twist in the narrative that threatened to upend everything. Brandon Wells's lawyer approached the Crown with a deal, a desperate attempt to salvage his client's future. Brandon Wells would plead guilty to all charges and cooperate fully in testifying against Lydia in exchange for a reduced sentence. He'd testify that Lydia had been the mastermind, that she'd planned the whole thing, that he'd just gone along with it, a puppet dancing to her tune. It was a coward's move, throwing his wife under the bus to save his own skin, a final act of betrayal in a relationship built on lies and deceit. But Melissa Zhang called me to discuss it, her voice hesitant. "If Brandon Wells testifies, we have an airtight case against Lydia. His testimony, combined with the existing evidence, guarantees a conviction and a strong sentence. What do you think? Will he serve time?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "Yes, we're offering 8 years with eligibility for parole after serving 2/3. He'll be in prison for at least 5 years, realistically longer. And Lydia, without the deal, she'd face trial. And there's always risk with a jury. But with Brandon Wells's testimony, we'd push for the maximum 12 years. I thought about Evelyn, still asking sometimes why Jenny doesn't call, her face etched with confusion and sadness. I thought about those 14 days in the basement, the darkness, the cold, the hunger, the fear. I thought about the life savings gone, the home equity gone, the trust gone, the family gone. "Take the deal," I said, my voice flat and unwavering. Brandon Wells pleaded guilty in February, his fate sealed. The sentencing hearing was brief, a mere formality. He expressed remorse, uttering the hollow words that his lawyer had undoubtedly crafted for him. The judge was unimpressed, his gaze unwavering. "Mr. Wells, You participated in a scheme that targeted vulnerable elderly individuals, including your own mother-in-law. You prioritized profit over human dignity. 8 years in federal prison, 1 down. Lydia Harper's trial began in June, under the harsh glare of media scrutiny. It lasted 3 weeks, a grueling ordeal that forced me to relive the nightmare day after day. The Crown presented the overwhelming evidence: the POA fraud, the bank transfers, the basement, the texts planning the Portugal escape. They called Evelyn to testify. That was the hardest day of my life, watching my confused, diminished wife try to explain what had happened to her, her words faltering, her memory failing her at every turn. She kept getting mixed up, forgetting details, asking if she could go home, her eyes pleading. Lydia's lawyer, in a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, tried to use that confusion to suggest that Evelyn couldn't be a reliable witness, that her testimony was invalid. But then, the Crown played the video that silenced the courtroom and brought tears to the eyes of the jury. The police had taken video of the basement the day they'd executed the search warrant, a stark and damning visual record of the horrors Evelyn had endured. That dark, cold space, the bucket, the thin blanket, the scratches on the door where Evelyn had tried to claw her way out, desperate for freedom, for escape. The jury watched in silence, their faces etched with shock and disgust. 2 of them were crying, unable to contain their emotions. Brandon Wells testified next, his voice monotone and detached, as if he were reciting a script. He laid out the entire scheme, meticulously detailing how Lydia had approached him with the idea, how she'd researched the POA laws, how she'd found the notary who wouldn't ask questions, how she'd planned the timeline around my trip to Vancouver. It was all her, he said, shifting the blame onto her shoulders with ruthless precision. I just did what she told me to do, even if that was partly self-serving, a desperate attempt to mitigate his own culpability. The evidence backed it up. Lydia's laptop showed that she'd been researching power of attorney, elder exploitation, and countries without extradition weeks before my mother's stroke, long before the opportunity presented itself. She'd planned this, meticulously and deliberately. Lydia Harper took the stand in her own defense, her performance a disaster. She tried to claim she'd been trying to help us, that Brandon Wells had manipulated her, that she'd never meant to hurt anyone. It was a pathetic charade, a last-ditch attempt to deceive the jury. The Crown destroyed her on cross-examination, dismantling her lies with cold, hard facts. Miss Holloway, you texted your husband. She'll forget. Give it another day. The confusion helps. You were referring to your mother. What were you hoping she'd forget? Silence. Miss Holloway, you locked your mother in a basement without food or water for 14 days. You stole her life savings. You planned to flee the country. And you want this court to believe you never meant to hurt anyone. Lydia broke down crying, sobbing uncontrollably on the stand. The jury was unmoved, their faces impassive, their hearts hardened by the evidence they'd seen. Deliberations took 4 hours, agonizing hours of uncertainty. Then, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was 2 months later, a final act of closure in this tragic drama. I submitted a victim impact statement, 5 pages long, detailing what this had done to Evelyn, to me, to our lives, how we'd lost not just our money, but our sense of safety, our trust, our family. Evelyn tried to submit one, too, but her Alzheimer's made it impossible for her to articulate her thoughts and feelings. Her neurologist submitted a letter instead, documenting how the trauma had accelerated her cognitive decline, how it had robbed her of what little memory and lucidity she had left. The judge read through everything, her face a mask of solemnity. Then, she looked at Lydia, her gaze unwavering. Miss Holloway, you are an educated, intelligent woman. You understood the vulnerability of your mother's condition, and you exploited it without conscience. You betrayed not just her trust, but every standard of human decency. This court sees no mitigating factors. Lydia Harper Holloway, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. I exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that released years of pent-up tension and grief. It was over, but it wasn't, not really. The civil suit settled a month later, another empty victory. Lydia and Brandon were jointly liable for $375,000, a sum that existed only on paper. Of course, they don't have that money. The court put liens on any future assets, wages, or inheritance they might acquire, but realistically, we'll never see that money. The restitution order from the criminal case says they owe us $175,000 plus interest. Another hollow promise. We managed to refinance the helilock into our mortgage, a necessary evil to keep us afloat, but we now have payments for the first time in 20 years. We'll be paying this off for the rest of our lives. Evelyn's care costs are climbing as her Alzheimer's progresses, spiraling beyond our means. Insurance covers some of it, but not all. I'm looking at possibly selling the house within a few years to afford memory care, the heartbreaking reality looming large on the horizon. Lydia is at Grand Valley Institution for Women, about an hour west of Toronto, serving her sentence. She'll be eligible for parole in 8 years have passed. Brandon Wells, my son-in-law, resides at Joyceville Institution, a medium-security prison near Kingston, Ontario. He's eligible for parole in 5 years. I haven't visited, and I won't. To me, Lydia Harper is no longer my daughter. People often ask if I regret pursuing the charges so vehemently. If I wish I'd sought a family resolution, some form of reconciliation. They question whether 12 years is too severe a sentence. This is what I tell them. Lydia Harper, in a cold and calculated act of cruelty, imprisoned her own mother, Evelyn Brooks, confused and increasingly terrified by the encroaching shadows of Alzheimer's, in a damp, dark basement for 2 agonizing weeks. She pilfered every penny we had diligently saved, funds earmarked solely for Evelyn's care and comfort in her twilight years. Her sinister plan was to let Evelyn die alone and forgotten, then abscond with the money, disappearing to some far-flung corner of the world. She executed this plan knowingly, deliberately, without the slightest flicker of remorse. 12 years isn't harsh. It's a testament to the failings of our justice system. A sliver of mercy granted only because she didn't succeed in her murderous plot. Evelyn doesn't understand where Lydia is. The disease has robbed her of that capacity. Sometimes, in moments of lucidity, she still asks about her granddaughter. I tell her Lydia is away on a long business trip, a fabrication I cling to. It's infinitely easier than attempting to explain the unspeakable truth to a mind that will only grasp it momentarily, only to have it slip away into the fog once more. Last month marked a turning point. Evelyn forgot who I was for the first time. She looked at me with vacant eyes, a stranger in her own home. She studied my face, really studied it, and asked who I was and what I was doing in her house. The fear in her voice was like a shard of ice through my heart. The moment lasted only an hour before recognition flickered back, the light returning to her eyes. But the line has been crossed. The final, devastating stage has begun. I often dwell on how Lydia stole so much more than our money. She stole our precious time, the time Evelyn and I had left together, dwindling even then, before Alzheimer's completely consumed her. Those 2 weeks, which should have been filled with shared laughter, gentle reminiscing, and the quiet comfort of companionship, were instead steeped in terror, uncertainty, and unimaginable suffering. Evelyn Brooks spent those days in a living hell. That is what I cannot, and will not, forgive. The money, with time and effort, can be replaced. The house, though filled with memories, can be sold. But those 14 days, and all the days since then, poisoned by stress, trauma, and fear, are irretrievably gone, lost to the abyss. So, no, I don't regret the 12-year sentence. If I had to do it again, knowing what I know now, I would fight even harder. Justice isn't about personal revenge. It's about accountability. It's about making a loud, unequivocal statement that some actions are beyond redemption, that some betrayals are unforgivable. My daughter, Lydia Harper, learned that lesson the hardest way possible. I pray that everyone watching this story learns it the easy way. Your family's trust is sacred. Break it, and don't be surprised when the consequences shatter you in return. As for me and Evelyn, we are still here, still fighting against the relentless tide of the disease, still together. That's more than Lydia Harper wanted for us. And it's certainly more than she will have for the next 12 years. And, honestly, in the grand scheme of things, that's the only justice that truly matters.